Good morning. I'm Erica Meltzer. I'm the bureau chief at Chalkbeat, Colorado, and thank you for having me, and thanks to our guests for being with us this morning. We're going to be talking about how we scale success and how we make sure that there are, in fact, great schools in every neighborhood. Wanted to start by talking with our first guest is James Cryan. He's the chief executive officer of Rocky Mountain Prep. It's a high-performing charter network that has 3 campuses now in Denver and is expanding into Aurora. And I was hoping that you could start by telling us about your strategy and your vision going forward and how that's maybe had to adjust in recent years as we have demographic changes, facilities challenges.
Sure. This is on. Can you hear me? Yeah. First of all, I think this is probably the most intimidating group of people I've ever been on a panel in front of. So many of you I have learned so much from and consider to be mentors, and yeah, so I'm intimidated. I want to own that. And I think the hat I'm going to wear today is that both as some of our experiences from RMP, and very clearly, I don't believe we're there yet. And our students and educators are working incredibly hard to create a rigorous and loving environment for every single student who walks through our doors. And there's so much more that we need to do to deliver on our promise that we make to every family and student. You asked a question about guiding strategy, and the thing that keeps me up at night is the glass half full part of Tom's comments, which really resonated for me. When I look at the SPF results from the past, I looked 2 years ago this morning on my way in, and I counted up out of the top 20 schools on the SPF, the top 20 highest performing schools, how many existed 13 years ago before Senator Bennett's leadership? Only 5 of them did. So 15 out of those top 20 schools are new schools to Denver and new options for our families. And I think that as a community, and for me as a leader and then us as a community, I'm not sure we've done a good enough job of telling that story and sharing that vision around what we can accomplish within a guiding strategy. I think that we have done a good job when we set Denver Plan goals of having a broad conversation around what are the most important priority goals, and I'm really proud and excited to work towards those goals and be part of that work. And I don't think we did the same in terms of how are we going to get to those goals? And how can we have a broader, more inclusive conversation around how we best get to those goals? And that would be my challenge for us as a group of Denver's leaders, and what I think about a lot of how do we have a new conversation around what that looks like. And I agree with Tom that the centrifugal forces in our politics really push to the extremes. And I think it's time to have a new conversation around what we want the next 5, 10 years to look like in terms of strategy of how we get there. Our strategy has been simple. We've been responsive to where there are needs for great schools for kids. The reason we're in Aurora is because I got calls from the superintendent in that community that said, we have had a school that we've tried to turn around 4 times, and we have not yet found success with that. And I'm tired of going in front of families and parents and saying we're going to do better and differently this time, and then having that not work out. And so that's the reason we're in Aurora. Our mission is to create rigorous and loving schools that create every opportunity for every kid to reach their full potential, and that's what we want to be. That's the work we want to be doing, and we know that needs to happen here in Denver. We know that it needs to happen in Aurora.
And Alex Magana is the executive principal of the Beacon Schools Network, which currently has 2 schools in Denver, and he's looking to expand in the form of an innovation zone. Can you tell us why you want to work within the district and why you want to work within the innovation zone model?
Well, we started when Tom and Michael Bennett were talking about the sense of urgency. We started at Grant Middle School, and we evolved to Grant Beacon Middle School. And we showed a successful model. We learned a lot from how quickly charter schools, innovation schools can make change happen quickly, and we showed Grant Beacon showing high growth, and Then there was an opportunity. The traditional route is you have a middle school principal and then they go off to high school or go to district. And it was asked, hey, why don't you open another school? And talking to James and seeing what some of the other charter schools are doing, and then what are the next steps for innovation. There was an opportunity to open a school in Southwest Denver where we're serving the students in Southwest Denver. People don't realize Grant Beacon Middle School, 80% of our kids come from Southwest Denver, so it was just a natural transition. So then we were able to set up the 2 schools. We created an executive principal. What is that? Well, an executive principal oversees the strategic planning, the budgeting, the oversight of the programming, making sure it's consistent. And then I really push my school principals to focus on the culture, because culture owns everything. And so I work closely with my school principals to focus on the culture and be in the classrooms, every day. And then for the zone, it was just another opportunity to see, okay, what are the next steps? Because there's many people here that I could just point to and call out that helped us along the way. So I think the zone opens up some additional opportunities to meet with and work with and collaborate with other individuals.
Why is it important to you to work within the district rather than through a charter model?
Good question. The district is doing incredible things. They're very open. Tom's been very supportive, and I don't. One thing that I remember him saying to me, he's like, "Don't run from the district. Help the district move forward in the change." And I took that. I'm like, "Yeah, that's a really good point." The district is very innovative. He's been a strong supporter of what we've been doing. It comes down to how much autonomy do we have of people, time, and money. And the innovation plan allowed us to do that. And then the zone process will allow some additional supports of really pushing for the governance and additional autonomies.
Jane Ellis is the executive director of the Colorado Charter Facility Solutions. She helps both expanding charter networks and small innovative startup schools meet their space needs. And can you tell us some of the opportunities that schools in Denver have had that maybe schools didn't have elsewhere, and how that's maybe not quite the same environment anymore?
Yes, thank you. Colorado Charter Facility Solutions was set up a couple years ago. It's funded by local funders as well as the Walton Family Foundation. And we're set up to help charter schools with their facility needs. And what sets Denver apart from a lot of other metropolitan school districts is that the majority of charter schools are actually housed within Denver public school buildings. It's very different from a lot of other metropolitan districts where they've been so generous with charter schools, and DPS's embrace of charter schools as just another tool in the public school toolbox, which includes, here innovation schools, regular traditional schools, as well as charter schools. But the facility issue now, as you heard in the previous conversation, the buildings are all occupied. 15 years ago, there were quite a few schools that weren't fully occupied. Now they're fully occupied. Are they fully occupied with high-performing schools? That's another question. But so what happens when a high-quality charter school network wants to expand, like Rocky Mountain Prep did recently when they purchased the facility from a failing charter school? You have to have private options. And so the issue for schools is that the per pupil revenue in Colorado and in Denver, while it's not the lowest in the country, it's not generous. It's not, in New York City, you have $18,000 per pupil plus $3,000 per pupil for your facility. So that's a big difference. And also real estate is very expensive there. It's very expensive here. So the shock for charter schools is that they currently in the DPS facilities are paying less than 10% of their per pupil on their facilities, and once you move to a private facility, they're going to be paying two times that, and more, a little bit more than 2 times that. So they're in the 15, 16, and most of the schools currently in private facilities within DPS are in the 20-something% range. So that means you have 80% to make a high quality school, which is a pinch. So that's where this fund is coming in and to help with some low interest debt. But we're finding that debt isn't the only thing that's going to help. in solving, making private facilities affordable. I would also say that one strategy, there's a lot of schools that are waiting to open, and I would say that that these schools actually maybe a strategy they could consider is to open in a leased space for 3 to 5 years, and hopefully, near one of the schools that aren't performing, and maybe have the opportunity, if a decision is ever made to restart a school, that they might have an opportunity to occupy that building if they're doing a great job where they are.
Brian Eschbacher is the executive director of the DPS Office of Planning and Analysis, and he's the one keeping track of all the changes that are going on in our city. What are some of the demographic changes that maybe you didn't see coming or that have a big implication for how the district approaches its work?
I think that it's been a profound shift over the last 2-3 years, and we've talked about adding 20,000 students when Senator Bennett and Tom were up here, and the great growth that we've had where we went from closing schools 10, 11 years ago to now reopening all of them. And it's unbelievable just how quickly that growth stopped on us. And I think the sexy thing to talk about is housing in Denver, that our housing prices are up. We're now one of the most expensive cities in between the coasts in the country. What that's doing to our families that can no longer afford to live in the city and maybe moving to the suburbs or maybe moving out of the metro area altogether. And so that's a factor that crept up on us quickly. There's some tipping point elements to that of when you can afford to live and when you can't afford to live. And so that's hit us hard. And then the other factor that is hitting every city in America is birth rates. Birth rates dropped in 2009 during the Great Recession, and they haven't come back. And so now that's 8 years of kids. And so that's about 800 kids a year in Denver that are not born. And so there's no amount of recruiting a school can do or a housing policy that can be done to create kids that just weren't born. And I think it's a challenge that it's a challenge that just hasn't reversed itself for us. And so those children that were born in 2009 would have been kindergartners in 2014. And so now we have our kinder, first, second, and next year it'll be our third grade cohorts, that it's a bit of a new norm for us, about 800 students less per year. And you start to add that up, that's a significant impact. And so that's where we've added 20,000 students over the last 8 or 9 years, and now we're forecasted to start losing a few thousand students over the next few years going forward.
How does that declining or potentially declining enrollment affect the ability to keep opening new schools or have a large diversity of schools in the city?
Yeah, so let's talk about the opening side. I think we've seen replications across the city, both on the district side, as Mr. Regagna said, on the charter side, as James Cryan said, and it's becoming tougher and tougher to fill. And so we have schools that come through the Call for Quality Schools, they're approved, we put them in the choice system, and they can't get enough kids to open. And we had examples of that this year, schools that maybe wanted 100 students to open and they could only get 30 through choice. We have schools, very successful networks that are replicating, and each time they replicate, they're getting fewer and fewer students as well. And that crosses quality, right? We have blue schools that are now half full. That is something I never could have imagined 3 years ago. But when you've now saturated the market with schools, and when the number of students entering the system is declining because of housing and birth rates, it's now leaving more blue schools open. Now, in theory, that's a good problem, right? We want to be able to maximize the percentage fill rate of our blue and green schools. And so, I think that's one of the new challenges for us to work on together is figuring out how do we best engage families on this aspect of quality. Because now, when we didn't have any blue or green seats open, it was a bit of a moot point. It was more of a waitlist game at that point. But now that we have blue-green seats open, let's go fill those.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Alex and James on that point. When we have a school choice system, we have students in low-performing schools, we have spots in high-performing schools that aren't filled. What's not working, and what could be done to move the needle on that?
I was one of those schools that was low-performing and did not have the enrollment. It's really nice to know that now we're a high-demand school and there's a high enrollment. I think the SPF has helped as far as having the green status. I remember lots of people thought we were on closure and we were going to be closed at Grant Middle School. But the benefit is of having the green schools being able to fill up is now lots of parents are talking. It's forcing schools to provide a a brand, a model that is unique to the individual student. So it serves a couple of things: is educating all students, but still giving students different types of opportunities that better fit their needs.
This is obviously a huge challenge that we face as a city, and a huge challenge as we think about how do we continue to build on the progress and the foundation that we've created as leaders in the city, and also give more options to families, especially families who don't have and traditionally haven't had a lot of quality options to choose from. My experience and our experience at RMP has not been that Brian shared exactly. We have found that that families are very savvy and that they're looking for schools where everyone knows their name, where their kid is greeted and hugged at the door, and they feel incredibly welcome when they're welcome to come through our doors and be in a classroom at any moment. And so our Creekside campus, we expect to have wait lists next year. At our Southwest campus, we expect to have wait lists in many grades next year, not all grades yet, in Southwest Denver where there's declining enrollment. From our experience, it's taken a few years to get to that point. And it's a place where parents are very savvy and looking for that option. And so I know that that's true from a systems level. For RMP, we try and play the 3 to 4 year game to build a community of families and really enroll from that perspective.
Brian had also mentioned some schools that got approval to open but did not get enough students to open. And then Jane, I understand that you have worked, I believe, with some schools that were in that situation. How does that play out when they invest, in getting a facility and getting approval, and then the students don't show up?
Yes, well, that is the biggest challenge. I mean, the challenge is twofold. One is getting the number of students. The other is finding a facility that you can afford. I mean, there are several now. Brian alluded to. I mean, I know that the Cube didn't get enough students. 5280 has been given a reprieve to recruit some more students, but they have to hit a certain target. All the while, if they want to open in August, you have to find a facility, and if it needs work, you have to figure out how to do that. And so, I mean, it's hard enough for existing networks to replicate and to go into new neighborhoods and serve more families. If you were starting with a great idea, which I think a great and innovative idea, I think 5280 is one of those schools that's going to serve high school students with substance abuse issues, so that they can get their education but not necessarily return to the high school where they found their issues or maybe had some issues. So I think it's a great idea, but can they enroll enough students, one, to open by DPS standards, and two, can they enroll enough students so they can afford a leased space? And so that's the real problem. I mean, the funds that Charter Facility Solutions has can help, but we're a loan fund. We're not a grant fund. So the monies have to be repaid, and so you have to be able to show that you can repay debt. So I mean, I feel for the networks who have charters that are approved and on the shelf and are waiting to open, but I also feel for new schools, brand new schools, that can't even get open because of, they need to enroll the students and they have the extra issue of finding a facility.
Can I just build on that quickly?
Please.
We have a tremendous energy here in Denver of young educational entrepreneurship and leadership, not young, but newer. And I, some of us are young too. And I think it's a tremendous waste of talent and opportunity if we can't figure out how to open some of these new schools. And we know that our schools across the city, to use Senator Bennett's term, are not all schools where every member of the Senate would be excited and proud to send their child or grandchild to. And so I want to make sure we as leaders in the city don't miss out on that next generation of educational talent and leadership through some of these systems level challenges and obstacles.
And I will also briefly mention that all of the high-performing networks of charter schools in Denver started as one school. And if we're not allowing new schools to open, that's, where is that going to come? Where is that new innovation going to come from?
And when we talk about scaling the schools that have been successful, how much do these demographic changes put a brake on that or put an obstacle in front of that scaling? Brian, if maybe you could address that, and then I'd be interested in Alex's thoughts.
It's certainly a new world. I think, the last 8 years, we're adding 3,000 students a year. If an average school size is like 400 kids, that's like 8 new schools that could just open just like that without impacting any of the schools around them. And so I think when we built up some of our policies or practices in that environment, it was very favorable. It was fun to work in that environment. I'd much rather open new schools than close existing schools, and I think we all feel that way. And that's not the environment we have now. And so I think that's the challenge of the market, where we're not growing anymore. We're shrinking at the younger grades. We're shrinking as a district as a whole now for the first time in 16 years. And so I think that it's a feedback loop of the tension between existing schools that may have loyalty, and some of them are high performing and some of them may not be high performing, and then wanting to introduce this pipeline of innovation into it. And when there's only so many kids, and when you have this need for financial viability, I think those tensions are pulling at each other harder than they have been at any point in the last 10 years.
And Alex, do you have thoughts on that as you're trying to grow your network?
As a network, we've agreed to we've targeted which group of families, students, community that we want to be focusing on. We understand there's a high need for students with on free reduced lunch, high Hispanic rate. And what I'm proud of is that over at Grant Beacon, we still have the same population of kids, and we're showing performance. So those are the things that pushed us to go into Southwest Denver and dealing with the additional challenges. Shared space, we share building. James and I share the building there, and then we're in the community. How do you really change that mindset? So a couple things is. I like what James said is about being savvy. Parents are. They want a high-performing school. They want their kids well taken care of. I think the other piece is it pushes schools to have a clear model. What is it? How are you going to meet the needs of individual students? And then it does force us, in which I've learned from other organizations, is to have a sustainability model. So what does that look like? I need to have close connections with some of the innovative elementary schools, so I know that they're coming in, and then also pushing which high schools our kids are going to be going to.
James, you're opening in Aurora. You're waiting for facilities in Denver. A lot of the families that you have traditionally served are the types of families that are moving out of the city. Have you reconsidered how much the future is in Denver, and is it bad if the future is not in Denver?
Yeah, I think it's bad if the future's not in Denver. I think the future's beyond Denver, but I do think it's bad if the future's not in Denver. I think someone I respect a lot used to say a lot that I fear in Denver we have A+ conditions, A+ talent, A+ ecosystem, and we're going to get C- results. And we know that in a system right now where only 20% of third graders who qualify for free or reduced lunch are proficient, we know that in a system right now where still today only a third of students who start in DPS in 9th grade will graduate on time and enroll in college, and half of those kids will need remediation. There's so much work we have to do in our city and in Denver. So I do think it's bad if we don't, as a community and as a group of leaders in this room, start to think about how we have a new conversation around how we're going to get there, how we break through some of the structural. We have to think differently about the structural challenges and the new context we're in, and we have to do much, much better at partnering with the community to shape a vision of what this is going to look like and how we accelerate change. And I believe we can do that because I know the level of commitment and talent in this room. So I'm really excited to do that work. We're a very small slice of that puzzle and pie right now, and we're really excited to continue to be hopefully part of that puzzle and pie, as long as our families say that we're still the #1 parent satisfaction school in the district, which I'm incredibly proud of. It's probably the stat I'm the most proud of. Our other campus is #5, so they've got a plan for how they're going to strengthen that. We need to get to work, and we need to keep working and keep being tenacious and aggressive in how we think about that.
I want to squeeze in one. Oh, I see that Alex wants to respond to that. So I won't squeeze in my question for Brian. Go ahead and respond, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
That's just for elementary, not the middle schools. Right.
No, all schools. No. Over 200 schools.
The way I take that question is I think schools need to, it doesn't matter who's in the building, every kid needs to perform at a high level. And I guess that's where so I love what some of the charter schools are doing, like with the ST and the Rocky Mountain Prep. They're looking at other districts. So people have approached me like, hey, Alex, does your Beacon model work elsewhere? I'm like, yeah, it will work. It should work at any school if you embrace our model of what our pillars are all about. So if anything, if you would ask me that question before, I was like, no, I got to stay in one spot. Now am I going, wait a second, maybe there is an opportunity. And I think James expanding to another district really pushed my thinking of creating a different model and serving more kids.
All right, I think we're going to go to questions. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Landon Mascareñas with A+ Colorado, and in the spirit of resisting orthodoxy, would love to kind of hear maybe from each of the panelists something that you've learned from your own personal experience, whether it's running a network or working inside the system or whatever you're doing, that you feel like might be unknown or unpopular, or something that you feel like we're not all thinking about in the context right now.
I think one of the way I'm interpreting that question is opening a second school made us better. We had to look in the mirror and say, what are we about and what are we good at? Who are we committed to? I had really rock star teachers at one school. Everything was working great. One principal, everything was fine. But when you expand, how do you sustain that? How do you recreate the culture? So I've learned a lot in the past couple of years. Is one, hiring, who we bring on, setting expectations. And then you can definitely empathize with how the orthodoxy starts to creep in, because then you want to start doing everything consistent. But it's being aware of it and monitoring that. But one of my big takeaways is just be clear on the vision and make sure that people are staying. So I have to pull myself out quite a few times and take a look at, am I clear on the vision of what we expect in the schools? But that's been my big learning.
Yeah, I don't think that has to just be a
Brian?
school leader
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I think.
I think one learning, whether it's about choice or whether it's about closing schools for not enough demand or low performance, it's that hearts always trumps minds when it comes to your children's education. I have created thousands of bar charts in my years at DPS. Very good-looking bar charts. Colors, no colors, you name it, I've done it. They rarely influence people's decisions, parents' decisions, because it's all about their personal experience. If I said your neighborhood is losing a ton of kids, they'll say, look at the strollers on my street. Regardless of that, I have an army of data with me. I'll say your school is low performing. They'll say my kid loves their teacher and they're happy to go to school every day. And so whether it comes to engaging on closings or in choice, it is that hearts always beats the minds. And that's where SPF is a very, very important factor, but it is not the only factor. We have just north of here on the other side of the golf course, we have a red school with almost as many kindergartners coming in this fall as a blue school. And it's because parents have some kind of connection to that school. There's something that is driving them there. And that doesn't make their decision wrong in my mind, right? I'm running the choice system so they are empowered to make that choice. If we think that they should be picking a blue school, well, then we need to figure out how to influence their hearts to do that, not just hit them over the head with proficiency data, which is not what's working right now in terms of their choices. And so I think it would challenge us in our engagement on a very personal level or on a big level as a city, is that we don't just try to appeal to their minds, and that we also try to appeal to their hearts about what this means for their family.
That was fantastic, because that was actually the answer to the question I was going to try and sneak in, which is what you've learned in this process that the people pushing for faster change need to hear and understand. Jane?
Yes. So I have two points. One is, and it's not really my bailiwick. I'm really a facilities person and someone who's done a lot of facility finance. But in Denver, I don't see the demand for quality schools, which sort of dovetails into what Brian said. If you have a lot of demand for a school that's not performing well, who's educating the parents to say, the principal's really nice, the teachers are really nice, but your kid isn't learning to read in 3rd and 4th grade. It's not ready to succeed for life. And, so how does that happen? How does that grassroots education happen for families? I mean, when the mayor of New York wanted to not allow Eva Moskowitz's Success Academies schools to grow the way she wanted them to, she had 10,000 parents walk across Brooklyn Bridge to the mayor's office. Has something like that ever happened here? I don't think so. So, I mean, that's part of that's part of my point I want to make. The other thing is about for growth, if the charters particularly, if they're growing outside of Denver, it's going to mostly be a private facility. They're going to have to finance their facilities. And so that has to be worked into the equation because most districts outside of Denver have not been as generous with their facilities. So you have in your financial sustainability model, that has to be put into that, and that's going to be harder for schools that are not used to having that 15, 16, 20% of their per pupil spent on their facilities.
I think my lesson is very similar to Brian's. I have an idea on how we do see more families choosing blue and green schools, and we don't always see that ubiquitously. So one tactical suggestion I humbly make is, can we put on the choice form online that we put the color right next to the school or the performance data right next to the school so it's really visible and easy to find when parents are making that choice. My lesson is the same, though, that data doesn't carry the conversation. I talk every single day about love, and when we work in this work and we choose this work, it is a giant responsibility because the work we choose is hopes and dreams and tears and relationships, and every single day we have to put our arms around our scholars and absolutely love them, and that is the work that we choose and we need to embrace, and I push for our team to embrace as we think about this work. And we know in terms where humans grow the most is when they feel the safest. And if we absolutely show every single day how much we love our scholars, they're going to grow the most.
Do we have another question?
Brian, are there any mothballed buildings in Denver Public Schools, A, and B, would they be available for charter schools?
So we only have one building left that doesn't have students in it today. It's a very small school in the Rosedale neighborhood in the south end of the city. And I think one of the challenges, I think it has 10 classrooms in it. 10 classrooms is going to get you about 150 kids in the building. And I think it's got some historic designation, so it would cost us at least $10 million to reopen it. James and I have talked about that building for a few years about a possibility, and the sheer amount of money it would cost to put into it, to open it and expand it to a place that's suitable for, 300 plus students. At some point, you're just better off building a new school instead of just pouring money into an old school that's going to have a ton of maintenance needs over the next years. Otherwise, as Senator Bennett and Tom said, we closed a bunch of schools. Every one of them has been reopened with students, and that's where we're at.
I think we can fit in one more question.
About the challenges that charters have in other districts. It seems to me that that's forcing them into that quasi-private zone that everybody who's anti-charter says charters are not public schools. And I just wonder if, as a policy conversation, there are people trying to tackle that so that we don't force them into that quasi-private, public-private area.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a balancing act. Most school districts in Colorado, as well as nationwide, do not embrace charters as a tool in the public education toolbox the way that Denver has. So there's that. For all the other districts, they need to understand that there are other ways to get quality education to their kids. But so if you don't have buildings, you have to have a schoolhouse to have a school. And if there are no schoolhouses and no one's, if there's no buildings available in Denver, or I was going to ask, is there land available? But we can have that conversation another time. But so yes, you do wind up with private solutions, and it costs. I mean, so James or Alex, if they did a private, it would detract from the money they have to educate kids. Like a lot. I mean, if you're paying 15, 20%, you have 80% of your per pupil dollars to educate your kids, pay your teachers, you don't pay your students. And so, yeah, and I don't know, it happens, that has been in some geographies, some school districts, it has been a source of friction. I would say there are a lot of schools that also have, a lot of school districts where charter schools don't even have to talk to the district. They say, I want to put a school here, and they put a school there. And that also causes friction when you sort of have a parallel school system.
So before we let you go, we have one lightning round question. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing, what would it be? And what is the real life constraint that's preventing you from making that change? And I guess we'll start with James and go down the row.
I think we're ready for a new community conversation about the strategy for how we're going to accomplish our Denver Plan goals.
Oh, you said magic wand, right?
Yeah, like anything,
Okay. Well, I mean, all of the schools that are not performing would somehow be performing and have whatever the school governance model. All those kids would have access to a quality education and have the opportunity to learn and thrive.
To build on those two, if you could give a floor of quality where you could assume that every neighborhood school is good, I would like to see more program differentiation that would give parents another layer to choose on. So it's not just quality, it's quality plus something.
For me, it would be the embracing a new structure to allow schools to continue being innovative. Some of the ideas came from, like we were saying, charter schools, new schools, but I'm going, hey, no, innovation schools too, because we're doing some incredible things. So we have to have that conversation. We can only have that with open dialogue.
And everyone did a really good job being quick, but you didn't answer the second part, which is what's holding you back. So let's come back this way. What's the number one thing holding you back?
Being in the balance between the two, being innovative, and then within the confines of the of the district and the requirements of that, that's where we struggle with funding, different governance structure, learning, because you're going into uncharted territory. So where I struggle with, and what I would love to have is where the funding piece, and then people being open-minded of the new model for us as far as the innovation zone.
I think holding us back is guaranteeing that floor of quality. We had a Montessori school not far from here, and it was very, very low performing. So it didn't matter that it was programmatically different. We weren't doing right by kids. And so I think it's that sequencing of quality, then program on top of it.
Well, what's holding me back is I don't have a magic wand. But I mean, the magic wand, would have to be, it's going to have to be, DPS, the school board, as well as, parents demanding better quality schools.
I don't know what's holding us back, and I don't know what's holding me back, and I intentionally picked a more pragmatic and achievable one. It doesn't need a magic wand, so I think we should do that, and I think that this can be the foundation of that today. I think the end of that, and what I would hope, is that we not only close, but we reverse the achievement gap. Because I believe if we close and reverse the achievement gap, we actually don't close the opportunity gap. Our kids do not have the same ladders, many of our kids do not have the same ladders of opportunity that I did growing up. And so that needs to be a start, not a finish.
Thank you so much. We're going to have a quick break. No, we're having no break. Everyone stay in your seats.